Welcome back. We have the great pleasure today of being joined by Alastair Crooke, one of the great diplomats of Britain and Europe, who are, sadly in short supply these days. That is the good diplomat. There's a lot I wanted to ask you about today, from what's happening in Iran to, of course, the massive strike on Moscow. Not so, well, the Western involvement is not very subtle. But to start off with Iran, it's again, we have this memorandum of understanding. From what I understand, it's been signed already, but we don't know. There's a lot of secrecy around this, and this has many many implications. Will it be upheld by the Americans? To what extent does it shape the region? We see the U.S. Israeli relationship is also impacted by this. Indeed, Netanyahu appears to be in a much weaker position now, but if he's pushed out, are they just rearranging the deck? I mean, most likely his replacement will be much more hawkish. Indeed, from what I understand, Netanyahu, at least he used to have some support by some of the Arab parties. Now, I don't know. It seems like this memorandum of understanding, irrespective of whether or not it will be actually implemented, it will nonetheless have a massive impact on the U.S., Israel, and the wider region. Now, this is a huge, massive question, but again, the issue is huge as well. So I was wondering if you could address this.
Well, it is a huge question you've just asked, but so I'll try two bits of it, perhaps, at least. First of all, I call it a framework because it's not really, something that it's not a treaty. It's not even really a ceasefire. It's a framework for a ceasefire. And as I keep repeating people, I've done 5, I think, ceasefires with the Israelis and Palestinians and others. And the framework is actually often the easiest part. The hardest part is thinking about how to construct a protective zone so that things can move forward, as they will be disrupted for sure. A bomb in a bus was one of the things that disrupted one of them, but equally, someone going out and saying, listen, we don't believe they're serious about this Hudner at all. And as soon as, they do anything, we're going to hit them hard. We already have some of these elements sort of visible approaching in this context of the framework now. But let us look at those 3 headings that you talked about. The first one is about the Iranian one. You underline the controversy of this agreement in the United States, but it's important to understand that it is controversial in Iran. There is a certain tension in Iran, understandably, because they've experienced and lived through the JCPOA experience when things were not upheld, and Iran was, in many ways, ordinary Iranian steel, trapped into a stranglehold, which they are still in. And however, yesterday evening, the Supreme Leader issued a statement in which he said that although he was opposed to the framework agreement himself, he was opposed to it. He was persuaded by Pezeshkian, and I presume Karivat, that he talked about the Honorable President, that there would be no backsliding on the terms of the framework or on Iranian interests. Iranian interests for the Supreme Leader predominantly center, I think, around Hormuz. I mean, he regards this as being the pivot to Iran possibly removing itself from the present situation and entering into a different geopolitical context. It's as wide as that from his point of view, not just, tomorrow, the day after, whatever it is. Hormuz is crucial. We can go into the reasons why it's sort of geopolitical, but he sees that in those terms. What I think he was doing was to sort of put on notice, not just, if you like, the reformist wing in Iran, but also a skeptical public. That this is not going to go down the path of the JCPOA, that it is going to be that Iran is not simply going to allow, precedents to be sort of established and then duly expanded and expanded and expanded until the whole meaning of the framework is gone. He's basically saying we're not going to allow them to sort of do some sort of precedent which will allow something to happen. The other element, of course, is Lebanon, and Lebanon is crucial. And Iran has substantially changed its position because Iran did not, in the past, in terms of the axis of resistance, intervene directly against Israel until this last period. This was the first time they've gone directly and threatened to bomb heavily northern Israel if Israel went ahead with its threat to flatten Dahir, a suburb of Beirut, and to completely attack. They said, we will go in around the south and attack the northern. That's the part really from the borders right through to the Galilee. And that was, of course, Trump then weighed in and the attack was stopped. So that is the other part. What we're seeing now is the thing being put under test already. And then we go on to America, if you agree, just in a second. But first of all, the Israeli press this morning, the Hebrew press, is again run riot with complaints and anger. And I mean, Israel is in real turmoil, psychological turmoil, emotional turmoil. It's not something small, little hump to get over. It's in deep turmoil. They see this as a huge defeat. They see this that the whole, great victory narrative of the government, to which many Israelis bought into this narrative, that there would be America flying, as they put it in their words, wingtip to wingtip with the Israeli brave airmen to destroy Iran completely, and that they were going to destroy Hezbollah and annex and steal half of Lebanon with the permission of, certain proxies in Beirut. And that is still going. And yesterday there was an attack on a ridge, which is near Beaufort Castle, I think. They started to try and take more territory in this region, these hills, Israel. And Hezbollah attacked them with an anti-tank missile. And 4 soldiers died, including a lieutenant colonel who was the commander of the 82nd Brigade. Turmoil, real sort of in Israel. Everyone is saying, this can't be allowed. I mean, 4 dead in one day. I mean, this is outrageous. As Ben-Gvir said, Lebanon must burn with us. And others have been saying similar sort of extravagant things, that we have to, Hezbollah has to suffer, we have to go in and we have to teach them a lesson. Lebanon must burn. I don't know what is going to happen, but the pressure, and as you rightly say, Netanyahu is under huge pressure because the polls were showing, the odds that he was going to win the election in March were, I think, at about 49 or 50%. I can't remember the exact figure. And they're about half of it, 34 today. So, I mean, it's half. If Trump has got problems with his poll standing in America, Netanyahu has got more. And as you know, I mean, that could imply that he ends up going to prison because this election looks as if he is his to lose. But that's on the basis of him doing nothing. Because in fact, I mean, the politics of Israel at the moment is that if Netanyahu does nothing about Lebanon, doesn't go on to the offensive in Lebanon, his election will be lost and he will lose it. I mean, this is wall-to-wall consensus. This is the situation. So that is what is facing the United States. The Israelis also, because there is a lot of question and turmoil about what this whole thing means, because even if it's not widely understood in the West, the Israelis see this as a huge turning point. A glass ceiling has cracked and broken, that Trump actually took sides on prioritizing an engagement with Iran over supporting Israel's right to take half of Lebanon and occupy it, and to continue with its policies throughout the region. And then Trump then said things that were, had never been heard in Israel before in the press conference after the G7 meeting. I mean, things that he never said before, and said, you're just too heavy-handed in Beirut. I've seen the photographs. You want to kill someone, and so you knock down the whole building with people living in it. This is not acceptable. It's not acceptable. We all thought it was acceptable to Trump, mind you, a month ago, if you'd asked people. But now, apparently, it's not. He said, you're not handling it very well. And then he made the most sort of derogatory sort of statement. He said, maybe we should hand this over to Sharar. He would be more sophisticated in managing Hezbollah and the Lebanon situation. In other words, he was saying, maybe an ex-ISIS leader could do better than you, Netanyahu, and you, Israel, in Lebanon, which was, I mean, an unparalleled sort of slap to the Israelis. So they are shocked by this, but they also say, and this is in the Hebrew press today, it's in Mari, and you can see it on our Substack because it will be out later today, I think. The sort of the comments, but it's also clear that the Israelis understand this is the Middle East has changed. It's a new era. There is no way that they are going to destroy Iran. It's not going to have a regime change. There's no way that they can do it without the United States. The United States provides everything. They cannot attack Iran without U.S. facilitation, refueling, all of these things. Impossible. They understand that. They know that is over. And it is a huge psychological defeat for the whole project. And equally, the sense that this Greater Israel project, by which they are assuming they can bring about Greater Israel by force of arms, irrespective of legal norms, everything, they will just do it. Whether it's legal or not, do it. They will do it. This was a huge change that was introduced after the 7th of October. This idea of permanence of security. But what it means is Israelis believe and have come to accept, that what happened on the 7th of October was somehow a Holocaust. It wasn't, but that's what they think now and feel, and that they now live, on the threshold of future Holocaust, and therefore Hezbollah cannot exist. It must be eliminated completely. So so they understand that actually Trump's words mean that the United States may be serious this time in imposing penalties, severe penalties on Israel if they go ahead and respond or retaliate in Lebanon, because this will be seen to be undermining Trump and his great achievement of getting Hormuz opened. That's why I underlined that point about Hormuz and the Supreme Leader in those opening comments, when I said, Hormuz was the most important to the Supreme Leader and to the leadership in Iran, and Lebanon was the second. Well, they're both connected, of course, because at the moment we are moving towards Hormuz being open. But if the situation in Lebanon constitutes a breach of the ceasefire, and that's certainly the Iranian perspective, as evidenced by their refusal to go to the talks. On Friday, they're declining to attend the negotiating session on Friday. Then that part of it also comes into question. And how is Trump going to respond? Because he said it out loud. It was quite surprising. Trump said, listen, we had to do this deal because we're running out of the reserves. I saw figures yesterday saying that in Cushing, it is down to 20 million barrels in the Cushing strategic holding. In other words, they're down to the sludge at the bottom, which is, it's got no particular use anyway. It has to be treated and everything before you can use the bottom end of a reserve like that, especially one that's in natural resources. So then it moves on to, that's really, I think, where we are with the framework. The framework, I think, more than many Iranians expected, more than I expected, has triggered this change in the United States. Partly because of Hormuz and partly because, the economic cliff is here. And Trump said it, we had to do that because we were 4 weeks away from running out of oil. So it has produced this change and has produced now a contentious battle in the United States, a huge battle between the pro-Israel Zionist groups and the Trump supporters, and who are insistent on what they describe as America first and not Israel first. How do they get to that point? And the midterms are coming up. Now, the question is, the general consensus, the normalist consensus is, this is going to be so damaging for Trump. He's going to lose, and the Republicans are going to lose. I must say, I had thought that, but now I'm not so sure. Firstly, because I think, that the election process for the Senate is a rotational. It's not all at once. It's one part and then another part goes up for election, like that. So actually, there's figures may be not exactly right, but there are about 20 Republican seats that are in contention at the moment, the Republican seats. That is, in the House. This is, this could swing the midterms for sure, but also it's not irretrievable, at least in the view, I think, of Trump and his team. 20 seats, not all of them will swish. And also, it's not clear. There does seem to be a sense in which the sort of the solid base of MAGA hasn't defected from Trump because of the personal loyalty more than anything else. Not because they like the war in Iran or anything else, but as a personal sense of loyalty to him, which has these emotional overtones that is very hard to define exactly, but he does have a considerable hold over people. And in many respects, because of this debate, which, prominent people are pointing out that, is America in control of its own foreign policy? Or have we, if you like, delegated our foreign policy to a foreign power? Is gripping the MAGA base in the aftermath of what happened, the assassination earlier of the Christian spokesman in MAGA, and Joe Kent also, and others are raising this issue. So I think there's a feeling that it may not be as catastrophic. In fact, there will be some in the Republican component that actually may think that, this is no bad thing, and therefore be more supportive of Trump than we thought. But it was, I hadn't realized that, the number of seats is actually not huge that will be allowed. But I mean, it may be exaggerated or not enough or whatever. Of course, it'll be contentious. But now, if Netanyahu goes in and attacks Lebanon, I think it will now shift to being seen to not just, slapping Trump in the face, but slapping America in the face. That it will be seen by MAGA. Maybe not by, obviously not by the neocons and the ardent Zionist element, but by many Americans, who don't understand all the nuances of it, but see that, there was a framework that was signed by Trump visibly at Versailles, and Netanyahu and Israel are blowing it up. I mean, if you see it in those simple terms, it wouldn't be surprising if actually, this rebounds to Trump's advantage politically. May not, too early to say. And, there's undoubtedly going to be major effort to overturn this by those that are committed to Israel's supremacy in the region and regional domination. And that, we don't know how that's going to turn out. Will they succeed? It'll be the first time that, a president has gone up. But Netanyahu essentially, not Netanyahu personally, because this is coming from all of Israel, all of the leaders, whether it is the opposition leaders across the board, all are saying, it's not just Ben-Gvir, they're saying, they must pay, they've got to suffer, they've got to be for these poor people that were killed yesterday. So if that happens, it is going to further, I think, increase the further increase the distance between the United States and Israel. It is going to push it further away and could push it towards taking some sort of measures. Perhaps they'd be tentative to begin with, but some sort of measures imposed on Israel for having for attempting to blow up, particularly if the Iranians respond to this by, if you like, restricting, not completely, but restricting to a certain extent the Hormuz passageway. Who knows what they will do? But this would be one. I mean, very clearly they understand this is the thing that brought events to a head and brought about the framework, and that's where they might well move.
Well, my first thought when I saw they had this remarkable statements by Trump was that they fell short of action. That is, it's just in the language. But on the other hand, this language matters. This is this, as you said, this is ringing through the media in Israel. This is putting shockwaves, but also in the United States. All the America firsters, the people who thinks like Tucker Carlson that they shouldn't put Israel first, but America first. They must surely feel vindicated. They have wind in their sails at the moment. So it does change.
It changes so much in that way. I mean, it has, something has broken. If you like, a paradigm has been blown up. And it was just in this piece of paper, which, as you say, is not a commitment to anything particularly. It's just a framework for starting, a different process. But that paradigm has been blown up because Trump visibly cited and said, and because of language, it talks about the sovereignty and the rights of sovereignty of Iran and by implication of Lebanon too. I mean, it says respect for the sovereignty of state, But I mean, Iran is being treated as a sovereign state and being engaged with as a sovereign state and not as a recalcitrant terrorist state. And that is a change. Yes, the language, I'm sure Trump will say, and you'll have Ted Cruz coming out and saying, they're all terrorists, they're all horrible people, we have to do everything against them. But the fact that, this language was incorporated in it, and then Trump at the G7 spoke in a very different way about Israel and said, you don't know what you're doing in Lebanon anyway, so it's best if you get out of it. Is a shock, a psychological shock. The whole paradigm is broken, and Israelis don't know what to do about it. I mean, really, they don't know what to do about it. And people are saying, and serious Israelis are saying, as Chikrinowitz is there, we will have to think about this in the aftermath because the original strategy of Israel is broken. And we have to think and understand that Trump is maneuvering towards a new sort of understanding between America and Iran. I don't know that it'll end up in an agreement or all of the elements of it, but there is a new, if you like, atmosphere. Let's just call it an atmosphere. There is a new atmosphere that is coming, and that he's serious about it. And he says, I don't think that this is damaging to Israeli security. Again, wow. I mean, this is quite interesting thing to say that, you can have a relationship that America can sort of get closer to, that Iran And all of those strange comments that he was making earlier, that he said about Iran could be part of the Abraham Accords, and he said sort of various other strange comments about Iran. I mean, seem to sort of imply, at least in Trump's the obscure workings of Trump's brain, that he's sort of moving towards some sort of idea that there can be, perfect peace, or whatever he calls it. This great peace can break up in the Middle East. And a key element of it could be played by de-escalation of the conflict with Iran. That de-escalating Iran could lead to something more secure in the region. And on that, he's probably right. I mean, let's, give Trump his due in that de-escalation in Iran is key to a more peaceful. The alternative that Israel presents of just going there and destroying a country and destroying all of those groups that are allied to it, simply destroying and killing more people, it's not a solution to stability. It's not a path to stability. It's the opposite. And I think somehow maybe this message is percolating up in Washington amidst huge opposition with people, infuriated and on the brink of sort of almost of civil war about this. So you have all these tensions about this. This really fairly innocuous document comes up and wow, tensions in Iraq, tensions in Israel, massive tensions in Israel, and tensions in the United States, I would say equally. I mean, strategic tension, because they're going to weigh on this, the forthcoming elections in the United States are going to center about this question about who runs United States foreign policy, and in whose interest is foreign policy formulated. I think that's going to be a key issue. So this is going to be that.
Well, building on what you said, I also thought his remarks about Iran's ballistic missiles were interesting, because in the past there was consensus around the idea that these terrorists should not be allowed to have ballistic missiles. This ballistic missile program to threaten its neighbors. Again, this was a key component of the U.S. demands as well. This had to be dismantled. I saw now a speech by Trump where he was making the point that, well, the Saudis have ballistic missiles. Of course, well, the Iranians have to have as well. Suddenly, it as you said, it marks a shift. They're not the terrorists who are illegitimate, who hold ballistic missiles. They are a state, but with basic national interest, and they will have to defend themselves like everyone else. I mean, treating them like a normal power, it is a huge step. It would be, especially in this day and age, when you have when the first objective is always to delegitimize the opponents. I mean, we delegitimize, Putin, Xi, like whenever we're gonna go to war, we make sure that we delegitimize them. And I think the fact that now it's going the other way, it is quite remarkable. And again, it opens the door for so many in the United States to essentially, come with common sense. They are a state. They have the right to basic national interest and protect themselves. You can take it a step further. If actually we should encourage their ballistic missiles, because this gives them a conventional deterrence, less reliance on nuclear deterrence. I mean, common sense could break out. So yeah, I think language is powerful. I did
Just
yeah.
I mean, the whole image. I mean, Iran is essentially fighting for its sovereignty, its right to determine its own path ahead. And this is catching, the imaginations of much of the world. It's not, we may be going back to that post-war period, or when the Bandung Conference and all those things, independence and sovereignty. Certainly, countries have noticed, how did they do this? Well, they did this by defying the United States' attempt to put financial and tariff choke points on them. Well, Russia has choke points. China has choke points put on it. I mean, and Iran has at least partially succeeded by taking assertive action against these United States checkpoints. This is a precedent that is going to have larger tail to it, I think.
Well, I wanted to shift a bit. Focus not completely. It's still about Western wars, but as we saw yesterday with this bombing of Moscow, unprecedented. And another thing which was quite different is in the West, the Western countries, they don't seem to work very hard anymore to conceal their own participation. I remember in the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you had people like Baerbock saying, listen, we shouldn't turn on each other. We are at war with Russia. And this was deeply problematic because we shouldn't say these things. But now we see all the weapons coming, the intelligence, I mean, the use of NATO territory. But now, of course, this massive strike on, last year, not just on Russia's nuclear deterrent, but now this massive bombing of Moscow. And, it's, I mean, the NATO footprint here is very obvious. It's advertised almost. I mean, how are you seeing this? Because I guess of all things, this is what's keeping me up at night. What seems to be a march towards what would be a massive war with Russia, which I can't conceive the possibility of us having any escalation control, and it would spiral very quickly into a nuclear war. Maybe I'm pessimistic, but this is madness here.
I think this is what you're saying is very pertinent to everything. Yes, indeed. Let me just say that I think all what happened, the I don't know how many drones and missiles were fired, 156 or something into that refinery in parts of Moscow. I mean, this is the major step up, and it's intended to put Russians on edge, Muscovites on edge, and people in St. Petersburg on edge, feeling that they're less secure. I think it was also coordinated it was pre-coordinated at the EU3, Euro 3, it's not EU, Euro 3, France, Macron and Merz meeting. I think it was in London just beforehand, where they put forward their, ultimatums for Russia, and then again, they brought in deliberately. Macron brought in the Zelensky to that meeting and to the European meeting, and I think what we're seeing, therefore, is a major effort by Europe to change the narrative. Macron has said, at the beginning, and he believes that, Trump thought that Russia as a big state would crush Ukraine easily, and that it would be done quickly. This is Macron saying Russia would crush Ukraine, and therefore, there was not really much to do about it because it was going to happen. And then that passed, and we see that Russia still hasn't crushed Ukraine, and the point of these missiles and the point of pushing Zelensky to the sort of front of stage at these two meetings was to say to Trump, look, it's all changed. They're not on the back foot, they're on the front foot. They are winning. No, it's not true. Of course we know it's not true. It was a huge effort to get together that amount of missiles, And, overall, these attacks on refineries have done little strategic damage to Russia. The economy is not in any sort of free fall. In fact, the economy is growing and employment is increasing. So it's a false narrative, but they were intent on stage managing it with Zelensky, and so the whole of that thing was about the G7 and about the EU summit that was going to take place, that has taken place in these last days, because the summit was going to look at EU budgets and financial resources. And there's a big division in Europe about whether, to agree to this huge budget that is being proposed by the Commission, with some states objecting to. So, I mean, the aim is to push for more defense resources going to Ukraine in the first instance. Secondly, to lay down the framework that Europe wants, and which is ceasefire, then Britain, France, and other states of the willing will take part in peacekeeping. So NATO will move into Ukraine. Ukraine will become part of NATO, eventually an EU. And the main element of it is to bring America into this agreement and into this process, to bring America back to Europe by saying, look, we've done our part, we're doing it. Look, you see what's happening, and Zelensky was showing photographs of the cathedral and how the Russians had destroyed this cathedral in Kiev. In fact, it was probably a Patriot missile that misfired that did damage, but it doesn't matter. The public relations went that way. And so, yes, this is where we are moving, and we will have to see how Putin, he has to respond. He has to respond to it. And the question is, are we moving closer to them responding in the way that Sergei Karaganov and others, like Dmitry Trenin and others at St. Petersburg conference, are saying, the only thing that will stop this ratchet, this escalation every time, further and further. And I mean, one of the agreements that came out of that trilateral meeting, more preparation, more missiles, more drones, joint what they call co-production, which means that they just ship over the parts for reassemble in Ukraine, and then Ukraine fires it at Russia. How do you put a stop to this? And this is the debate in Russia, and I think it's edging closer and closer to what I described as Karaganov's argument. The problem is that they don't believe that we will react. We being Russia, it's all said, that's just Putin's bluff. I mean, don't take it seriously. He's not going to do anything because we're NATO, Article 5. And the Russians and Putin, I think, believes that Article 5 is the bluff, that, that if there was an attack, and I think Karaganov on your program argued quite forcefully and directly that he really doubted that America would intervene, even if a tactical nuclear weapon was used against the European NATO state, that they would intervene. And Professor Mearsheimer, if I recall correctly, agreed with him. He thought that that the United States would not necessarily directly become involved. But both agreed also that this could lead to something much worse, that this could escalate and go out. And I think all we've seen in these last days is Europe trying to get to the position where they have, I think it was Macron or something said they want to create Ukraine as the male fist at the front of European military and NATO military architecture against Russia, that it is to be the front line, putting pressure and attacking Russia behind it. Now, I'm hugely skeptical of these stories, and I've said that in Moscow. I don't believe Europe has the ability to build a military architecture. You can't, when I hear 1997 or 1930, it takes 20 years to do supply lines, to build a real military infrastructure that is being, I mean, let alone they don't even have the men. I mean, you can see, I mean, look at the UK. It can't even provide a naval vessel at the moment. It can't provide, it's got something like 40 tanks that are serviceable. I mean, the European defense structures are in terrible state, really terrible state. You don't change that in 3 years. And anyway, much of this money is just, one of these boondoggles. The money is going to existing European defense contractors, and their share prices is going up. And a lot of people are going to make a lot of money sort of going in and out, insider trading on who's going to get, the defense money. So it's rather like, what's been happening in Washington, I think, with, the oil futures, with, just before Trump makes an announcement, then, there's the big, sale of purchase of oil futures. And then he makes the announcement, peace. And then, I think there's an element of this taking place in the European context too. So I don't think it's so. What they really want is, if I can make a strange comparison, but I would say it's rather akin, if you think of Europe as being Israel. Israel is using Lebanon as an attempt to pull in, and has been pull in America on its side in a war against Iran. And Europe, in a similar way, is doing this with, just as Israel is doing attacks inside Lebanon and taking towns and leveling them. Europe is using missiles into deep Russia in order to say to America, look, we can win this. We've set the framework for it. We can win this. All we need to do is pull you into this, stand by the condition that, Russia has to capitulate and withdraw from all of the sovereign territory of it and pay compensation and put up its officials for war crimes trials. I mean, Europe is moving very fast with the European Council to arrange all of the means for, war crimes trials and reparations, assessing, keeping lists of damage so they can charge Russia the cost of all these things. I don't think this is going to fly at all. I mean, Putin clearly understands it. I read a statement that Lavrov was going to put it in Politico. I don't know if you've seen it, but a very strong account of the system. Politico refused to publish it, I think, in the end. But I mean,
well, the foreign ministry published it in Russia.
Oh, they have. Okay. Well, I mean, it's a very strong article, a very strong piece. I suggest people read it because it's very clear, gives a very clear indication. So now we know very clearly where things are. The Europeans are pulling Trump, and they were very pleased with the G7 meeting because they got him actually to sit with Zelensky, and they, got him to sort of more or less agree with the European position, which is there must be immediate ceasefire, total sovereignty return to Ukraine, all of these maximalist demands of Europe. They are maximalists. Russia would never agree to any of these. So they getting Russia trying to get this as the accepted consensus, and to try and pull America in that consensus, and then if they can, pull America into supporting their war, into going to war against Russia with Europe. That's been, the German, the French, and British aim is to get a war against Russia, in which, like in the Second World War, they pull in Roosevelt, not pull in Trump, find the initiative to, then it was Pearl Harbor, or whatever it was, to pull America into their war against Russia. It would be catastrophic. I mean, this is a plan that is catastrophic, and people should understand how dangerous it is, how catastrophic it could be. It could end up, because Russia will not tolerate it. I was very struck by what was said about Germany on your program by Caragonov, who does know about the nuclear issues. I mean, he has been involved in this for years, decades. And he said, we will not tolerate Germany assuming having nuclear weapons. We would eliminate it first. It was a very tough comment. I mean, we are playing with fire, I think. So I agree with you. What's happened there, what happened at the G7, at the European meeting, and no one seems to sort of be aware, or all the talk in Europe is how disgraceful it was that Costa's chief of staff actually spoke to someone in Moscow without telling von der Leyen. I mean, he is actually the president of the council, and in case the Europeans have forgotten, it is the member states that decide foreign policy, not the Commission, and not the foreign high representative. It's water off a duck's back to them. They just go on anyway.
Yeah, but what you said before, though, I agree. I think this is the goal by the Europeans, that is to have Ukraine standing in front of them and the Americans standing behind. This is how they will seek to weaken Russia over the next years and decades. But
still, I mean, I think, maybe you ought to get someone on the program who can answer this. I mean, even in Israel now, people are saying, there was no discussion about, an attack on Iran. There was no one, from the Mossad or military, Amman, the military intelligence, or anyone that, came when all of this was being discussed and said, but what happens if Iran survives and emerges stronger? Nobody said anything. And if they did think it, they kept their mouths shut. And I think the same question should be asked of the Europeans. What do you conceive a war on Russia would look like? Would it be ground troops? Would it be simply a nuclear war? Would it be, how would you run it? I mean, are you going to mass troops? And would it be a conventional war? Or would it be an asymmetrical war? And it would be led by Ukraine in this way. And what would be the outcome? I mean, when you see that, the NATO states are sort of practicing by building prisoner of war camps in parts of it, I mean, it's just nuts. But I have no sense of what, if Europe thinks about what it's trying to do beyond the big picture of, putting pressure on Russia, bringing America back to Europe, getting Europe to give more money and more weapons to Ukraine. I mean, what would war with Russia mean in practical terms? Would it be an air war? Would it be a ground war? Would it just be a nuclear war? It's a question that never seems to be addressed, perhaps because no one wants to address it, because just like No one in Israel wanted to seem, other than, we're part of the team. We're going to go and get wingtip to wingtip with the Americans and going to destroy Iran. Wingtip with the Americans, we're going to go in and destroy Russia.
Yeah, I think this is the problem. They often think that the war is simply going to be, yes, something low intensity that they can control. I think they often miss out on why Russia hasn't retaliated against the European countries yet, or against NATO in general, because once they do, the Russians also understand that there is no escalation control anymore. It's going to be impossible, and most likely it would escalate into an all-out war where nuclear weapons could quickly be introduced. I mean, and it's still the idea is that if you can just push the Russians a bit more, and once a war breaks out, like the Dutch are building like in camps for Russian prisoners and all this. I mean, I often make this point: how exactly do you think this war is going to play out? Once it starts, it's not going to be able to be controlled. The idea that Russian soldiers would go into Europe, the Europeans would capture them, send them to Dutch camps. I mean, it's so obscene, but it's not even within propaganda. They actually believe this. Otherwise, why would they build these camps? They actually think this is how the war will be fought. It does beg the question, though, like is anyone actually behind the wheel on this one? Because this is absurd.
This is the question. Like it's now come out in Israel. No one was asking that sort of question. And the same thing I would say, the whole of the strategy is based on the European conviction that Russia would and must capitulate. It would have no choice against the combined force of Europe, so many countries, such a big GDP, such a military strength of NATO, that it would have no choice. And just as what happened in Iran reflected a complete misunderstanding of the nature of the Iranians, the character of the Iranians. So such a conviction that Russia was going to capitulate or would easily capitulate is a complete misunderstanding of Russia and Russia's consciousness of their history with Europe.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights on this very depressing topics. I, as always, recommend that people read your Substack Conflicts Forum, and a link will be in the description. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.